The rain had been falling for hours, relentless, cold, and unyielding. Water cascaded from the gutters, pooled in the street, and soaked deep into the cracked red soil of Oak Ridge, Arizona. On the edge of Sycamore Street, just outside the black, iron gate of a modest ranch house, a lone German shepherd sat motionless in the downpour. For 3 days, the dog had not moved far. Through the pounding rain, through flashes of heat and gusts of wind, through the growing concern of neighbors, and the outright rejection from the house beyond the gate, he stayed. His once proud frame was now thin, trembled with fatigue. Ribs pushed against sodden fur. Amber eyes, dimmed by exhaustion, remained fixed on one point: the house where Sergeant Michael Callahan lived alone. Inside, the man behind those windows watched in silence. Hands clenched into fists, jaw tight. Every instinct told him to turn away, to ignore it, to pretend the dog didn't exist. He had built these walls for a reason. Mike Callahan wasn't just another cop. He was Stone Cold Callahan, a name spoken with both respect and resignation around the precinct. The kind of man who showed up first and left last, who didn't crack under pressure, who didn't laugh at jokes in the break room, who didn't cry at funerals, not even his own wife's. But outside, in the relentless rain, sat a dog who didn't seem to care about the walls Mike had spent decades building. He didn't beg, didn't bark, didn't leave. He just waited. Why? What did he see in this man? What instinct told him this was the place to stay, the person to choose? The people of Oak Ridge, a small desert town with a population just under 9,000, would soon ask themselves the same questions. The story that began with a soaked, silent dog and a stubborn, broken man would ripple through the community like the floodwaters that had just devastated their town. And what happened next would leave the entire town speechless. Because sometimes, it's not the loudest moments that break us open. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones where a drenched animal refuses to walk away, the ones where grief cracks, just slightly, and someone finds their way in. This is not just a story about a dog. It's a story about loyalty, about memory, about second chances that come when we least expect them, and about a man who thought he had nothing left to give until one stubborn German shepherd showed him otherwise. Stay with us, because what happens next changes everything. The monsoon had come early that year. In Oak Ridge, September rains were never gentle. They arrived like an uninvited guest, crashing, flooding, and transforming the beige desert landscape into a chaotic torrent of brown rivers and broken trees. Roads disappeared beneath waves of rushing water. Cars stalled, power lines sparked, and in the low-lying neighborhoods east of Cottonwood Drive, entire homes stood knee-deep in mud. Sergeant Mike Callahan had seen worse. In 27 years, with the Oak Ridge Police Department, he'd weathered every kind of emergency the Arizona desert could conjure. But this flood was different, relentless, and strangely personal. Callahan's cruiser rumbled along the cracked streets of the Eastern District, his wipers slashing furiously against the windshield. A clipboard full of damage reports sat on the passenger seat, along with a thermos of lukewarm coffee he'd forgotten to drink. He was documenting water levels for emergency management, a task he'd volunteered for, not because he wanted to be out here, but because he couldn't stand being inside. Inside meant thinking. Inside meant remembering. He didn't do that anymore. He parked beside a battered mailbox near the remnants of an old stucco house. Half the roof was gone, ripped off during the storm's first night. He reached for his pen, prepared to jot down another hopeless figure, when movement flickered at the edge of his vision. It was subtle, a shadow, big, moving slowly between two flooded homes. His body reacted before his brain did, years of conditioning overriding reason. His hand dropped toward his holster, muscles tensed, the breath caught in his throat. A dog. A large German shepherd emerged from the alley, soaked to the bone but composed. Not limping, not scavenging, not wild-eyed the way strays often were after a disaster. This one moved with purpose, Then it stopped, 20 feet from the patrol car. It sat, perfectly still, ears alert, eyes locked on his. Callahan felt the hair on his arms rise, a cold sensation crawling up his spine. He hated that feeling, that instant, unexplainable connection. No, he muttered to himself. He rolled down the window an inch. Get out of ye. Here, he barked, voice hard. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't break eye contact. It was unnerving. Those amber eyes, intelligent and unsettling. Not hopeful, not scared. Focused. Callahan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Suddenly a voice broke the tension. Hey there, pup. You lost? He turned sharply. Officer Jenny Ramirez, new to the force, fresh out of academy, her optimism still intact. She walked toward the dog from across the lot, clipboard under her arm, rain plastering her ponytail to her uniform. Stay back, Callahan snapped, sharper than intended. She paused mid-step, brows raised. That's a stray. Could be dangerous. He doesn't look dangerous, Ramirez replied, eyes on the dog. He looks trained. Callahan opened his door slightly, using it as a barrier between himself and the animal. The dog didn't react, just sat there, dignified as a statue. I don't care if he's the ghost of Rin Tin Tin, Callahan growled. Animal controls overloaded, leave it. He stamped his foot, waved his arms. Go on, get. The dog tilted its head. Didn't move. Ramirez smirked. I think he likes you. Well, the feeling ain't mutual, Callahan muttered. He turned his back on the animal and walked into the nearby community center, paperwork in hand, irritation trailing behind him like a second shadow. 30 minutes later, as he stepped back out into the rain, he didn't expect to see the dog again, but he was wrong. It wasn't waiting at the entrance. It was trailing him, a few paces behind. Callahan spotted the reflection in his rearview mirror, amber eyes catching headlights, silhouette moving quietly in step with his cruiser. At the next stop sign, he slammed the brakes a little harder than necessary. The dog sat down, waited, then stood again as the car pulled forward. This is ridiculous, Callahan muttered, pressing the gas pedal a little harder. At the station, he barely glanced back. As he walked inside, he didn't need to look. He knew the dog was there, but inside the teasing began. Blake Thompson was first. Hey, Sarge, looks like you've got a new partner. Callahan grunted, not amused. Dorothy Miller from dispatch leaned over her desk, peering through the rain-streaked glass at the figure in the lot. That ain't no mutt, she said. That's a working dog. Military, maybe. Don't care, Callahan barked. Someone call animal control. They're still cleaning the shelter, Thompson offered. Flood backups, no room till tomorrow. Outside, the dog remained. Throughout the day, officers slipped him bits of food. Jerky, a water bowl. He accepted them politely, but he never left his post, just waited. At 6:30 sharp, Callahan exited the building, ignoring the dog entirely. But when he drove off, there it was again, trailing him again. When he turned unexpectedly into Oak Ridge Grocery's parking lot, the dog paused at the sidewalk, watching. That's when Callahan lost it. He slammed his door, stomped toward the shepherd, and pointed a finger with fury. I don't want you, I don't need you following me. Go find someone else. People stared. From the corner, Martha Wilson shook her head. For heaven's sake, Michael, it's just a dog, she called. And from the looks of it, one that's been through hell. Stay out of this, Martha, he snapped. The dog didn't run, didn't whine. It just sat. Again. Callahan turned, defeated in a way that had nothing to do with the dog, and everything. To do with the past he refused to face. By the time he reached home, he'd taken 3 unnecessary turns trying to lose it. But when he took out the trash later that night, there it was, sitting at the gate, waiting. Still, the rain hadn't stopped, and neither had the dog. The next morning, the rain returned with a steady rhythm, less violent, more persistent, like a whisper that refused to be ignored. It tapped on windows, pooled along gutters, and turned Sycamore Street into a slow-moving stream. Callahan's alarm blared at 5 a.m., right on schedule. As always. Routine was his religion. Shower, shave. Uniform on the hanger, perfectly pressed the night before. Coffee brewed precisely 8 minutes. Toast down at 5:12. Butter, no jam. News on low volume. No talking, no music, no deviation. This morning, something felt off. He couldn't name it, not yet. He finished his toast and stood by the window. Rain streaked the glass in diagonal lines, warping the world outside into soft, shifting patterns. Then he saw it. The dog. Still there. Still sitting at the gate. Same posture. Same unshakable presence. Callahan blinked. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, pulling the curtain closed. He refused to let it affect him, but it did. Against his will, his gaze kept drifting back toward the front of the house, toward the shape just barely visible through slats in the blinds. The German shepherd hadn't sought shelter, hadn't curled up in a corner or wandered off to find food. He was soaked through. Again. His body shivered slightly, tremors barely, visible through the steady curtain of rain, but he never moved from his position, never turned away from the house. The persistence was maddening and haunting. Callahan tried to shake it off. He busied himself with tying his tie, an action so mechanical he could do it with his eyes closed. But this time, his hand hesitated. Halfway through the knot, his eyes had wandered to the photograph. It sat on his dresser just as it always had. A boy grinning in a too large police cap, brown hair wild from the wind, missing one front tooth, holding up a plastic badge like it was made of gold. Daniel. Callahan swallowed. "Not today," he muttered, and turned the picture face down. He always did that on the hard days, the days when the memories pushed through the cracks. Outside, he stepped into the rain, umbrella snapping open with practiced ease. He moved down the walkway quickly, eyes straight ahead, pretending not to notice the dog tracking his every step. When he reached his car, he paused, unable to stop himself from glancing sideways. The shepherd's head turned slowly, deliberately, not with desperation, just watching, waiting. "You won't be here when I get back," Callahan said, more to himself than to the dog. "Even you aren't that stubborn." But he was wrong. Again. Martha Wilson was already on her porch, arms crossed under a floral housecoat as if waiting to ambush him. "That poor creature's been there all night," she called. "In the rain. Haven't you got any decency left in that badge of yours?" Callahan didn't respond, just opened his car door. "At least leave him some water, Michael," she continued, her voice softer now. "He's not asking for much." Slammed the door, not out of anger, but frustration. With himself, with her, with the damn dog. On the drive to the station, the rain intensified. Flash flood alerts crackled over the emergency radio. Roads closed. Dispatch buzzed with updates. Fallen trees, power outages. A whole week of chaos compressed into 2 days of water and wind. Callahan dove into work like a man possessed. He volunteered for everything. Patrols through the worst-hit neighborhoods. Riverbank inspections. Coordination with fire rescue. Anything. To avoid that house, that gate, that dog. Anything to stay busy until Thompson found him. "Sarge," he said, sliding up beside him in the break room. "That shadow of yours still out front?" Callahan didn't look up. "What are you talking about?" "Jenkins drove past your place this morning," Thompson replied. "Said the dog's still there, hasn't moved." Callahan said nothing. "He tried to give it jerky," Thompson added. "Wouldn't take it. Just stared at your house." "It's just a stray," Callahan muttered. "Doesn't act like any stray I've ever seen." Before Callahan could reply, Chief Williams entered, shaking rainwater from his coat. "Everyone listen up," he announced. "We've got a report from the sheriff's office. During the initial flood, a military transport was caught near Sycamore Creek. 3 working dogs on board. High-value assets. 2 still missing." The room fell silent. "German shepherds?" Ramirez asked. Williams nodded. "1 handler survived. The dogs were swept downstream when the cages gave way. Air Force is asking for any sightings." Callahan's stomach clenched. He said nothing, didn't even blink. But inside something shifted. Could it be? That dog outside his house? He dismissed the thought. Too much coincidence. Too many assumptions. Still, throughout the afternoon, his thoughts kept returning to the gate, to the unwavering stare, to the silence, and something else. Something he didn't want to name yet. Recognition. By shift's end, the rain was pounding. Again. Streets turned to rivers. Callahan drove slowly, windshield wipers working overtime. As he turned onto Sycamore Street, headlights caught a flash of color. There, still there, the dog, exactly where he'd left him. But now he looked worse, much worse. The shepherd's fur was plastered to his ribs, revealing just how thin he'd become. His head hung lower. His body trembled more violently. Still he sat. Still he watched. Callahan pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine. He sat in silence, watching. Something unspoken lodged in his chest. Not guilt. Not yet. But maybe. Shame. From her porch, Martha watched him watching the dog. She didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Eventually, Callahan opened the car door and stepped into the storm. He walked slowly to the gate. The dog lifted his head, eyes dull but still locked on Callahan's. "You still here?" he asked, voice low. The shepherd blinked once. Callahan sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "You know normal dogs would have given up by now." Martha appeared beside him, umbrella in hand. "I've been trying to give him shelter all day," she said. "Food, blankets, even built him a tarp setup by the hedge. He won't move, not unless you tell him to." "Me?" Callahan scoffed. "Why would he listen to me?" Martha looked him square in the eye. "Because he's chosen you, Michael, you thick-headed fool." Callahan didn't respond to Martha's words. He just stood there, in the rain, eyes locked on the German shepherd that still hadn't moved. Martha's umbrella was now tilted slightly to cover part of his shoulder, but he didn't acknowledge. Do or her. He didn't want to hear it. Chosen? By a dog? He scoffed. Then, without another word, he turned back toward his house. Martha didn't follow. Neither did the dog. Inside, he peeled off his soaked uniform and threw it over a chair. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, drank half in one long swallow, then stood at the window again, watching the rain turn his front yard into a shallow pond. The shepherd was still there. Callahan drew the blinds shut with a sharp tug, but even then, he could still feel the stare. It wasn't just the dog that haunted him. It was the echo of footsteps in the hallway, the sound of laughter long gone, the memory of a door that hadn't opened in over a decade. Down the hall it waited, untouched, undisturbed like a tomb. The bedroom that had once belonged to Daniel. For 15 years it had remained sealed, not by locks. Not physically, but in the way that only grief can seal something shut. Occasionally, when the guilt was too strong or the whiskey too weak, Callahan would crack the door open just an inch, just enough to confirm that everything was still there, untouched. The bed, the bookshelf filled with dusty model airplanes, the trophies from Little League, the oversized police badge poster tacked to the wall, faded from sunlight and time. And above it all, Daniel's name carved into the wood of the closet door. Messy, imperfect, etched by a child's hand with a pocket knife Callahan had given him for his 10th birthday. It had been a good day. One of the last. Callahan dropped into his recliner and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come. Not really. He drifted, through memories that refused to stay buried. Daniel at the police department open house, tugging at his father's sleeve, eyes wide as he watched the K-9 demonstration. He had been obsessed with dogs, especially police dogs. He collected trading cards, read books, memorized handler commands. "Dad," he'd said that day, "I want to be just like you, but with a dog." Callahan had chuckled. "When you're older," he'd replied. A promise. One he hadn't been able to keep. The image shifted. The dream always did. Sunlight turned to shadow. The open field became chaos. Screams, blood. Daniel's voice. Callahan's own shouts too late, too far, a uniform stained red, a dog out of control, and a little boy's wide eyes going still. Callahan awoke with a gasp, chest heaving, the echo of the scream still ringing in his ears. It was 3 a.m. He sat on the edge of the bed, drenched in sweat despite the chill of the house. The rain hadn't stopped. Through the bedroom window he could see the silhouette of the German shepherd, still sitting, still watching, still waiting. "You'll be gone by morning," Callahan muttered, rubbing his temples. "You have to be." But even as he said it, something inside him twisted, because part of him knew the dog wasn't going anywhere. Callahan returned to the window and watched for a long moment. The shepherd hadn't moved, egged away. Wasn't pacing, wasn't whining, wasn't digging or howling or scratching at the gate like strays sometimes did when desperate. He was just there, solid, steady, unshaken by the storm. The respect that had begun as a whisper the day before now pulsed louder. This dog had endured 36 hours of rejection, cold, and rain, and hadn't budged. That wasn't normal. That was dedication. Callahan went back to bed but didn't sleep. At sunrise, he rose before his alarm. He moved through his routine, but it was different now. Waited. He looked at the photo of Daniel again, still face down from the day before. This time, he didn't turn it upright. He didn't have the strength. Instead, he went to the hall closet, stood there a long moment, then opened it. Inside hung a child-sized police uniform, the one Daniel had worn on Halloween every year from age 6 to 10. It was too small for him the last year he wore it, but he hadn't cared. He had worn it with pride, with joy, with purpose. Callahan stared at the tiny badge stitched onto the front. Junior Deputy. He reached out but didn't touch it. Instead, he closed the door, carefully, quietly. Outside, the shepherd remained. The puddle beneath him had grown deeper, and now the dog sat in water up to his ankles. Still, he made no attempt to move. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of the front door opening, but otherwise he remained perfectly still. Callahan walked down the steps, umbrella in one hand. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching. The dog lifted his gaze, blinking, rain out of his eyes. There was something there, something deep, a recognition, a request. Callahan turned away. He couldn't do it. Not yet. But as he stepped into his cruiser, he found himself glancing back again. The shepherd was still watching, not demanding, not begging, just waiting, as if he had all the time in the world. The storm didn't ease. By midday, it had turned from a steady drizzle to a full-throated deluge. Gutters overflowed. Sidewalks vanished under brown water. The world outside blurred into a wash of gray. Callahan's cruiser splashed down Sycamore Street, tires sending muddy water in arcs to either side. When he pulled into his driveway, he saw the shepherd immediately. Still there, but now something was different. The dog's posture had changed. Not fully collapsed, but close. His head hung lower. The space between his breaths had grown longer. His ears were less alert, drooping slightly at the tips. Callahan frowned. He climbed out of the car slowly, ignoring the rain as it pelted his shoulders. As he approached the gate, the dog stirred slightly, lifting his head with visible effort. "You're killing yourself," Callahan muttered. The dog's ears twitched at his voice. But for what? He looked thinner than before. Rain clung to every strand of his fur. The puddle beneath him had turned into a small pool. "You're going to die out here, you know," Callahan said again, his voice gruffer now. Behind him, a door opened. Martha. Wilson stepped out onto her porch, wrapped in a massive yellow raincoat. She carried something under her arm, a folded umbrella and what looked like a bowl of food. Without a word, she walked across her yard toward the fence, planting herself beside him. "I've been trying all day," she said simply, holding out the bowl. "He won't eat." Callahan didn't answer. I rigged a tarp near the hedge, she continued. Dry spot. Not perfect, but better than this. Still, Callahan said nothing. Martha shook her head, the rain dripping from the brim of her hood. He's waiting for you, Michael. Not for food, not for shelter. For you. That's ridiculous, Callahan muttered. Is it? She stared at him with those sharp, time-worn eyes. You've seen the way he looks at you, the way he follows you. You think that's chance? That dog has been through hell, and still he sits here waiting for one person. And it's not me. It's not the mailman. It's not the others who've offered help. It's you. Callahan's jaw tightened. You think he... What? Mine? I think he's chosen you, she said. That's not how this works. It is, Martha said gently. With animals like this? Sometimes they choose, and once they do, they... Don't let go. Callahan looked away. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, don't I? She snapped, but the fire in her voice was tempered by sorrow. I've lived next to you for almost 30 years, Michael. I was there the day it happened, the day Daniel... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Callahan flinched like she'd struck him. You don't have the right, he said, voice low. I have every right, she said, stepping closer. Because I lost someone too. My son, James. Vietnam. And I spent the next 5 years hating the world, hating God, drinking too much, sleeping too little. Shutting everyone out. She paused. And I would have stayed that way. If it hadn't been for a 3-legged tabby cat that showed up one day and refused to leave. Callahan stared at her. Are you comparing this to a cat? No, she said. I'm comparing it to healing. Because sometimes, Michael, healing doesn't come through therapists or time or tidy little endings. Sometimes it comes sideways. Unexpected, uninvited. She gestured to the dog. And sometimes it comes in the form of a stubborn animal who refuses to stop loving you, even when you give him every reason to. Callahan looked back at the shepherd. The dog hadn't moved, still sitting, still shivering, still watching. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. No, Martha agreed. But maybe it's what you need. She reached out, pressed the umbrella into his hand. Here, at least keep him dry while you figure it out. Callahan didn't move. Michael, Martha said softly, it's been 15 years, and I know grief like you do. It doesn't go away, but it changes. If you let it. He stared at the umbrella in his hand. This is ridiculous. Probably, she smiled. But do it anyway. He took a hesitant step toward the gate. The dog's eyes lifted, faintly alert again. Callahan felt something twist in his chest. He crouched down, holding the umbrella out above the shepherd's head. The dog blinked once. You're not going to move, are you? No response, just quiet rain. The eyes full of something that felt disturbingly like faith. Callahan gestured toward the tarp Martha had mentioned. Go on, he said. Get under there, out of the rain. Nothing. He pointed again, more firmly. Under the tarp, now. To his shock, the dog rose slowly, stiffly. He limped across the yard to the hedge and sat beneath the tarp, dripping but obedient. Callahan stared. Martha smiled. Told you, she said. He listens to you. Callahan handed her the umbrella and walked back inside without another word. That night, he couldn't stop checking the windows. The dog had returned to the gate, ignoring the shelter, still sitting, still watching, still waiting. By morning, the storm had changed tone. The sky was darker, almost bruised. The rain came in unpredictable waves, sometimes a drizzle, sometimes sheets that fell like the whole sky had cracked open. Trees leaned under the weight of water. Debris cluttered the curbs. The streets of Oak Ridge were a soggy battlefield, but the dog was still there. Callahan didn't need to open the curtains to know. He felt it now, like an ache in his chest. That presence. The quiet insistence. The dog didn't bark, didn't scratch the gate, didn't cry. He just waited, and something about that quiet loyalty began to rattle the bones Callahan had spent 15 years hardening. He went about his morning, as usual, mechanical, efficient. But when he glanced in the mirror, something unfamiliar looked back. His own eyes, softer, weary, haunted, yes, but less barricaded. By the time he arrived at the station, he had almost convinced himself not to think about the dog. He would handle his shift, report in, and ignore the knot of discomfort that had taken up residence under his sternum. Then Thompson found him. "Sarge," he said, stepping into the locker room where Callahan was removing his raincoat. "You might want to hear this." Callahan raised an eyebrow. "There's a briefing," Thompson added. "Something about the flood, military involvement." That caught his attention. Minutes later, in the main bullpen, Chief Williams addressed the assembled officers. His uniform was damp, his expression grim. "Got word from the county," Williams began. 2 nights ago, during the worst of the flooding, a transport from Davis-Monthan was caught near Sycamore Creek. He let that settle. Military dogs. 3 of them. German shepherds. En route to a Phoenix facility for advanced training. Callahan froze. "Any survivors?" Ramirez asked. "The handler made it," Williams replied. "Sergeant James Wilson got 1 other handler out before their vehicle was swept off the road. Tried to release the dogs, but the water was too fast." Ramirez exhaled slowly. "They think the dogs are still alive," Williams nodded. "Possible. These aren't house pets. These are trained working animals. Survival instincts. But they've been missing nearly 3 days. And if someone finds one," Thompson asked, "contact dispatch immediately. They're valuable assets, trained for detection, rescue, and combat. The Air Force wants them back, badly." A hush fell over the room. Then Miller, ever observant, turned toward Callahan. "Didn't you say a shepherd's been hanging around your place?" Callahan stiffened. "It's a stray," he said quickly. "Been there a few days." "Purebred?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe." "Amber eyes?" Ramirez asked, suddenly attentive. Callahan didn't answer. "Could be one of them," Thompson said. "Jenkins saw it yesterday. Said it just sits at your gate like it's on post." "I said it's a stray," Callahan snapped. But no one argued. They just looked at him. The silence in the room was louder than words. He turned away, tension knotting between his shoulders. Back at his desk, Callahan opened his drawer and pulled out the file from the week before, animal control response notes during flood season. He scanned pages, pretending to be busy, but his thoughts weren't in the paperwork. They were at his front gate, with the dog. No, not a dog. Not anymore. A possibility. A soldier, maybe. Callahan found himself remembering the dog's posture. The way it sat at attention. The way it didn't eat unless commanded. The way it tracked his every movement with disciplined focus. Not random. Not coincidence. Training. Muscle memory. Loyalty. The kind only forged through repetition. Through purpose. Through a bond with a handler. He cursed under his breath. Back in the break room, Thompson cornered him again. "You okay, Sarge?" "Fine." "You don't look fine." Callahan gave him a withering glance. Thompson held up his hands in surrender. "Look, it's just, I've never seen a dog act like that. Not even K9 units. It's like he's waiting for an order that's never coming." Callahan said nothing, but the words stuck. Waiting for an order that's never coming. That night, the rain came heavier. As Callahan turned onto Sycamore Street, his headlights caught the same sight they always did. The shepherd, still there, still, soaked, still waiting. He parked in the driveway and didn't move, didn't turn off the engine. He just sat there, watching. His own breath fogged the windshield. The dog didn't flinch, didn't rise, just blinked slowly against the rain. As if daring him to look away, he thought about the possibility what Chief Williams had said. Military dogs, valuable, trained, lost in the flood. And now, this one, here. On his street, at his gate, choosing not to leave. Callahan sighed, pressing his fingers against his forehead. "Not my problem. he whispered. But it didn't sound convincing, not even to him. The call came just after noon. Callahan was halfway through organizing flood response routes when dispatch buzzed him over the intercom. "Sergeant Callahan, you're needed in the conference room." He assumed it was another coordination meeting. More maps, more red ink, more people looking to him for leadership he no longer wanted to give. But when he entered the room, it wasn't a planning team waiting for him. It was the military. A tall man in a soaked Air Force uniform stood beside a civilian, in a raincoat bearing the logo of a private contractor. Both looked serious, tired, driven. "You're Callahan?" the officer asked, stepping forward. "Yeah, Major Lewis, United States Air Force. This is Mr. Harlan from Canine Systems Operations. We're here about the German Shepherd at your property." Callahan's heart thudded once, hard. He nodded slowly. "There's a dog at my gate," he admitted. "Been there for days." Lewis exchanged a look with the contractor. "May we see it?" Callahan hesitated. "He's in rough shape. Been sitting out in the rain, barely eating." "That aligns," Harlan said, pulling out a tablet. "May I show you something?" Callahan gestured for him to continue. The man swiped through a gallery of photos. 3 dogs in military vests. Fit, alert, beautiful specimens of discipline and power. The 3rd photo made Callahan's breath hitch. The eyes. That posture. That intensity. "That's him," he said before he could stop himself. "Or it looks like him. Hard to tell with all the mud." "His name is Sentinel," Harlan said. "He was one of our most promising trainees." Callahan blinked. "Name?" "They all have names," Lewis added, "but only a few live up to them." Callahan felt a strange heat behind his eyes. What was his training for? "Dual-purpose work," Harlan replied. "Search and rescue, detection, patrol." Sentinel showed extraordinary aptitude for disaster scenarios. Could locate a buried target in under 90 seconds. Very rare. Callahan nodded, slowly processing. "What about his handler?" Lewis's expression darkened. "Sergeant James Wilson. He was the one transporting the dogs when the flood hit." Callahan's stomach dropped. "Wilson?" he echoed. "From Oak Ridge?" "Yes," Lewis confirmed. "He was local, joined right after high school. Your neighbor, Martha Wilson, is his mother." Callahan staggered a half-step backward. The room tilted just for a second. Martha had known. "She's my neighbor," he muttered. "She never said." "She may not have known what to say," Harlan offered gently. "But Sergeant Wilson used a unique training protocol. He was imprinting Sentinel on specific scent markers tied to missing children." Callahan frowned. "Whose children?" "Actually, yours." Silence fell. "What?" Lewis stepped forward. "According to his training logs, Wilson used personal items belonging to your son, Daniel. Items his mother had saved. He believed it would strengthen Sentinel's instinct to locate endangered children." Callahan's legs nearly buckled. Daniel. Suddenly it all made sense. The way the dog had waited, watched, chose him. Sentinel recognized. "Your scent," Lewis said. He found the only other person linked to those items. Callahan couldn't speak. The civilian contractor broke the silence. "We need to move quickly. The dog's condition is declining. If it's him, and it sounds like it is, he's valuable, but more importantly, he's in danger." "There's a vet 5 minutes from my house," Callahan said. "Closer than the base." "Done," Lewis agreed. "We'll follow your lead." They drove through pouring rain. Callahan pressed harder on the accelerator than was safe, his windshield wipers no match for the deluge. When he turned onto Sycamore Street, he saw it instantly. Sentinel had collapsed, no longer sitting, no longer waiting, just lying there, half submerged in muddy water. Callahan slammed the brakes and jumped from his car. "Sentinel!" he shouted, the name coming naturally. The dog's ears flicked weakly. His eyes fluttered open. "Hold on, buddy," Callahan muttered, kneeling in the cold water beside him. "He's in shock," the contractor said, rushing over. "Severe dehydration, hypothermia. We need to go now." Callahan didn't hesitate. He slipped off his jacket and wrapped it around the dog, carefully lifting him into his arms. He was light, too light, his powerful frame reduced by exposure and hunger. "You're going to be okay," Callahan whispered. He placed Sentinel in the back seat of his cruiser and peeled away from the curb, tires spinning in the mud. The military vehicle followed close behind. The Oak Ridge Animal Hospital was already alerted. Dr. Elena Reed waited at the entrance, her expression calm but urgent. "Severe exposure case," she confirmed, examining Sentinel on the treatment table. "We'll start fluids and warming protocols immediately. Do whatever you need," Major Lewis said. "He's high priority." "He hasn't eaten in days," Callahan added, his voice hoarse. "Maybe longer." The vet nodded and worked quickly, inserting IVs, wrapping Sentinel in blankets. Her technicians moved with quiet efficiency. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Flood," Lewis answered. "Swept from a transport unit, missing 3 days. Been sitting at my gate since yesterday morning," Callahan said. Dr. Reed glanced up sharply but said nothing. She kept working. After several tense minutes, she looked at Callahan. "He's stable. For now." A pause. "But he's not out of the woods." Callahan nodded. "I'll stay with him," he said without thinking. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "You don't have to," Lewis began. "I want to," Callahan said simply. "I will." The others filed out, leaving Callahan alone in the treatment room. He sat beside Sentinel's table, one hand resting lightly on the dog's flank. "Why me?" he whispered. The answer, he suspected, had been sitting in the rain for 3 days, waiting for him to be ready to hear it. The fluorescent lights of the treatment room cast a sterile bluish hue across the stainless steel table where Sentinel lay, motionless beneath layers of thermal blankets. An IV line dripped steadily into his front leg. A heart monitor beeped, a slow, steady rhythm. Too slow for comfort, but steady. Steady was hope. Callahan didn't move for hours. He sat in a molded plastic chair, elbows on knees, hands clasped together like a man in prayer. His eyes never left the dog. This wasn't a stray anymore. This was a soldier, a survivor, and somehow, inexplicably, his. The room was quiet except for the machines, the occasional shuffle of footsteps from the hallway, and the rain tapping on the windows like it couldn't bear to be forgotten. At 3:11 a.m., Sentinel stirred. It was subtle. A flicker beneath his eyelids. A twitch of one paw. Callahan straightened. He leaned forward, watching. Then the dog opened his eyes, slowly. Dazed, but aware. Amber eyes met gray ones. Callahan's breath caught in his throat. "You're awake," he whispered. Sentinel blinked once, then slowly tried to raise his head. Wobbled, then fell back with a soft thud. "Take it easy," Callahan murmured. "You've had a rough couple days." Sentinel's tail thumped once beneath the blanket. The motion was so faint, Callahan almost didn't believe it. But it was. There. Connection. Recognition. Not because someone told the dog to respond, but because he wanted to. Callahan reached out tentatively, fingers hovering just above the shepherd's ear. Then, slowly, gently, he made contact. Sentinel didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, he closed his eyes and leaned slightly into the touch. Callahan's throat tightened. It had been years since he'd let himself feel this kind of connection, this kind of trust. He ran his hand gently down the dog's head, feeling the coarse dampness of his fur, the warmth slowly returning beneath the layers. "You waited for me," he said aloud. Why? He didn't expect an answer, but part of him knew. The next morning, Dr. Reed returned with coffee and cautious optimism. "He's improving," she said. "His vitals are up, hydration's working, body temperature is stabilizing. Still a long way to go, but I think he's out of the danger zone." Callahan nodded. "I'll cover the costs," he said. She paused. "The military usually handles these." "I don't care," he said. "He came to me. He stays with me." He studied him for a moment. "You're not the same man who walked in here yesterday." Callahan looked down at Sentinel. Neither is he. By late afternoon, Sentinel was sitting up, not for long, not without help, but he held his own head, drank from a bowl, licked a bit of soft food off Callahan's fingers. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. And for Callahan, every small act was monumental. He began to talk to the dog. Not long conversations, not confessions, just quiet words. Name's Mike. Pause. Michael Callahan, technically. But only my wife ever used the full version. Sentinel blinked slowly. You met Martha. That woman could interrogate a brick wall. A soft thump of the tail. You've probably figured out I'm not the most sociable guy. Another blink. Callahan chuckled, softly, awkwardly, like someone remembering how. But you just sat there, waited, like you knew. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. That night, he returned home alone for the first time, in nearly 2 days, and the silence was heavier than ever. He stepped through the front door and paused. Then, slowly, he walked down the hallway he'd avoided for so long. The door to Daniel's room stood like a monument at the end. Callahan stared at it for a long time. Then he opened it. Dust danced in shafts of fading light. Everything was as he'd left it. The baseball glove, the drawings taped to the walls. He stepped inside, ran his fingers along the desk, and there it was, the dog tag. Daniel's. He picked it up, held it tightly. Memories flooded in like water breaching a dam. Birthdays, late-night talks. The first time Daniel told him he wanted to be a cop. The last time they spoke. He swallowed hard, blinked back tears. Then slowly, he walked back down the hallway into the kitchen. He opened a cabinet that hadn't been touched in years, pulled out an old battered dog bowl. He washed it, dried it, filled it with clean water. When he returned to the animal hospital, Sentinel's eyes lit up, not with excitement, but with recognition, like he'd been waiting for that bowl, like he'd seen it before. Callahan set it down, then sat beside him on the floor. I think you knew him, he whispered. Sentinel leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently to Callahan's. And for the first time in 15 years, Mike Callahan let himself cry. Not because he was broken, but because something inside him had begun to mend. Callahan hadn't shopped for anyone but himself in years. His pantry was a tomb of canned soup, old coffee, and stale crackers. His refrigerator was worse. But now, standing in the pet aisle of Oak Ridge General, he felt more overwhelmed than he had the first time he'd walked into a crime scene. So many bags, so many labels. He squinted at the packaging. Chicken meal. Grain-free, high-protein mobility blend. Omega-3s for coat shine. What the hell is a sensitive stomach formula? He muttered. A young woman nearby with a toddler on her hip smiled politely. First dog? Callahan hesitated. First? In a long time. She pointed to a brand on the middle shelf. That's what we use for ours. German Shepherd, big guy. Sensitive but loyal. Just like yours, I bet. Callahan managed a small nod. Yeah, something like that. He bought the food. 2 bags. A stainless steel bowl. A leash. A collar. Toys he didn't think Sentinel would ever care about, but somehow couldn't leave behind. And a dog bed, though. He suspected Sentinel would end up on the floor beside his own. At home, he moved differently. He cleared a corner of the living room, rolling up an old rug, sweeping the floor clean. He placed the bed down with careful hands. He set up the bowls, one for water, one for food, on a raised stand. Looked up a guide online about portioning. Printed it out. Then he did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He opened every curtain in the house. Light spilled in. Not bright. It was still raining, but enough. Enough to see the photos on the mantel again. The ones he'd left but never looked at. One of Daniel as a baby. One with him on Callahan's shoulders at a baseball game. Another, older, faded, of his wife, Anna, holding Daniel in the hospital. He dusted them all for the first time in 15 years. When he returned to the animal hospital later that afternoon, Sentinel was already on his feet, wobbly, slow. But, standing, Dr. Reed gave him a half-smile. He's ahead of schedule. Callahan raised an eyebrow. Why? She shrugged. Because he has a reason to be. Sentinel barked once when he saw him. Not loud, not demanding, just a single sound of greeting. Callahan approached crouching low. You ready to go home? He asked. Sentinel wagged his tail, and just like that, they left. The ride home was quiet. Sentinel sat in the back seat, head resting on the console, occasionally glancing up at Callahan like he was memorizing the road home. When they arrived, Callahan opened the passenger door and stood back. Sentinel jumped down slowly, looked around, then walked straight to the front gate. Not the porch, not the yard, the gate where it had all started. He sat there, looked up at Callahan, like saying, "This is where I chose you." Callahan swallowed hard. "You're already writing your own story, aren't you?" Inside, Sentinel sniffed every inch of the living room. He explored the hallway, stood outside Daniel's door for a long moment, then moved on, respectful, as if he knew. He settled in the spot Callahan had prepared. Didn't protest, didn't demand, just laid down, let out a long sigh, and rested his head. Home. Over the next few days, something happened in that house, something small and slow and miraculous. Callahan began opening windows when the rain paused. He turned on music, soft jazz mostly. He cooked a real meal, and another. He took Sentinel for short walks, just around the block at first, then farther, down by the dry creek bed, through the park where Daniel had once flown kites. People noticed. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to him in years began waving again. Martha brought over cookies, sat on the porch while Callahan and Sentinel sat on the steps. "He's filling out," she said one afternoon. Callahan nodded. "So am I," he said, only half joking. Sentinel had found a rhythm. He ate when told, came when called, slept beside the couch, watched Callahan with those deep amber eyes that always seemed to know more than they should. But there were moments, fleeting, fragile, when Sentinel would rise in the middle of the night and pace, as if searching, as if remembering something just out of reach. Callahan would wake, sit up, and wait. Eventually, Sentinel would return, lay his head on Callahan's foot, settle again, and Callahan would rest his hand on that thick fur and whisper, "You're not alone anymore." Neither was he. It had been 17 days since Sentinel arrived. 17 days since the gate. Since the silence broke. Since the man who once turned his back on the world began to step slowly back into it. Callahan had not returned to full duty. He hadn't needed to. Everyone in Oak Ridge had seen the change. They watched him walk Sentinel through the town square, pause for conversations he once would have avoided, even sit with children at the farmer's market who reached out to pet the dog that had once been too thin to stand. People whispered that he was healing. They weren't wrong. But healing, as Callahan had learned, was not the same as being healed. Some wounds never close fully. Some just learn to breathe again. That Monday, the storm warnings returned. Flash flood alerts, rising creek levels. High winds. Oak Ridge emergency services were called back to high readiness. Callahan stopped by the station to drop off Sentinel's updated medical files. A courtesy, nothing more. He didn't expect to stay long until a call came through. Dispatch. To all units. We have a missing child. Last seen near Sycamore Creek, 4 years old, wearing red rain boots. Responding to name Ellie. Silence fell in the room. Then Ramirez turned sharply toward Callahan. "That's 3 blocks from your house." Callahan froze. Sycamore Creek, the same one that swept away Sentinel's unit, the same one that had nearly taken Daniel. He felt Sentinel stiffen beside him, ears forward, body alert. Dr. Harlan's words echoed in his head. He was trained to find children. Without hesitation, Callahan grabbed a radio. Dispatch, this is Callahan. I'm en route. I've got Sentinel with me. Static. Then, confirmed. Officer Callahan and K9 en route. He didn't stop to explain. Didn't ask permission. He just moved. Sentinel leapt into the cruiser as if he'd never been away. They sped down flooded streets, tires slicing through water. At the scene, chaos, fire trucks, rescue units. A distraught mother clinging to a soaked firefighter, repeating, "She was chasing a duck, just a duck. I turned away for 1 second. Callahan, crouched beside her. She's small? Tiny, the mother sobbed. She won't answer strangers, but she loves dogs. Callahan looked at Sentinel. Find Ellie. The dog didn't wait for further instruction. He sniffed the boot the mother offered, then bolted. Callahan followed, splashing into ankle-deep water, heart pounding. Sentinel led them across the muddy trail, down a narrow bank, past the broken fence line. Suddenly he stopped, ears forward, head low. He began to bark, sharp, insistent. Callahan pushed forward through the brush and saw it, a flash of red. A small figure huddled beneath the roots of a fallen tree, water creeping toward her. "Feet, Ellie," he called. She didn't answer, but she looked up, saw the dog, and smiled. "Doggy," she whispered. Sentinel crawled forward, slow, deliberate, and lay down beside her. Callahan approached, crouched low. "I'm Michael," he said gently. "We're going to get you home." She clutched Sentinel's fur tightly, and he let her. Didn't move, didn't flinch. Callahan scooped her up, Sentinel trailing behind, back through the storm, back through the mud, back into the arms of her mother. The crowd erupted in cheers. Callahan didn't hear them. He was too busy staring at the dog by his side. Sentinel. His Sentinel. Later, as they sat together in the cruiser, both soaked and exhausted, Callahan leaned back against the seat. "You saved her." Sentinel blinked, then placed his head on Callahan's lap. Outside, the storm had not yet ended, but for the first time in a long time, the man and the dog didn't fear it. They were part of it, and they were stronger now. Together. The rain finally stopped. It didn't announce its leaving with sun or fanfare. Just a hush, a stillness, as if the sky had finally taken a deep breath and decided to rest. Oak Ridge exhaled too. Crews cleared debris, children returned to playgrounds, their boots squelching in leftover mud. Neighbors leaned over fences again, swapping stories of storm days and survival. Life resumed, not perfectly but bravely, and on Sycamore Street, something rare had taken root. A man and a dog. 2 survivors, 2 sentinels of their own sorrow, now guarding something else entirely. Callahan didn't speak much about what happened that night at the creek. He didn't need to. People in town saw the shift, how he stood straighter, smiled easier, lingered a little longer when someone said hello. They saw Sentinel too, at his side, always. They weren't just a man and his dog. They were a story. One. People whispered to each other when someone said healing was impossible. One kids pointed at when they saw the patrol car and said, "That's the hero dog." One widower mentioned softly, blinking back tears, "Maybe it's never too late." At the precinct, Callahan turned in a request, not for retirement, but for reinstatement with a K9 partner. Unofficial, of course, he said with a wink. They approved it, no badge, no papers, but everyone knew Callahan was back. Sentinel was his, and together, they had work to do. Still at night, when the house quieted and the old grief crept in around the edges, Callahan would sit on the porch with Sentinel by his feet, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Sometimes he'd speak aloud, not to the dog, not to the wind, but to Daniel. "I didn't forget you," he'd say. "I just didn't know how to keep going." Sentinel would shift, leaning his weight against Callahan's leg, and the silence would feel a little less empty. Somewhere deep inside, Callahan understood. Sentinel hadn't just saved a little girl. He'd saved him too. From the flood, from the silence, from the self-imposed exile of grief that had stolen more than just a son. It had taken his future. But now, There was a future again, a different one, quieter, but real. Because some dogs don't give up, and sometimes they teach us how not to give up either. End of part 1. But this isn't the end, because in the next chapter, a new voice will emerge. Soldier recovering from trauma, a town on edge after a second storm, and a bond that's about to be tested in ways no one saw coming. Episode 2 of Ordinary Miracles Sentinel premieres next week. Until then, hold on. The story isn't over. Not by a long shot.